You are standing at the edge of a world that has spent more than 3,000 years pretending you do not exist. Beneath the soles of your feet, the desert sand is not merely hot, it is heavy, dense with the crushing weight of a deliberate, systematic silence. The air here does not circulate, it hangs, thick and breathless, carrying the faint, metallic scent of sun-baked limestone and the ghostly, ancient aroma of long-evaporated frankincense. If you look out across this desolate, crescent-shaped plain, a place the modern world calls Amarna, but which was once given a name so holy it was only whispered, you will see nothing but a jagged horizon of broken foundations and shattered pillars. It looks like the aftermath of a natural disaster, a place where the earth simply opened up and swallowed a civilization. But as your eyes adjust to the blinding glare of the Egyptian sun, you begin to notice something far more unsettling. The destruction here was not born of nature's blind fury. It is too precise, too meticulous. The defacement of these stones required an immense, terrifying amount of human labor. Look closely at the fallen lintels, at the shattered fragments of statues, half buried in the dust. Every single face has been methodically chiseled away. Every eye has been blinded by a mallet. Every nose hacked off. Every mouth silenced. Most importantly, every single hieroglyphic cartouche, the sacred oval frame meant to protect a ruler's name for all eternity, has been violently gouged out, leaving only a hollow, scarred cavity in the stone. This is not the ruin of a city that died. This is the corpse of a city that was murdered. And the man who built it, the man who once walked these very avenues, believing he had reshaped the cosmos, was not merely buried, he was erased. In the official king lists, carved into the grand temples of Abydos and Luxor, by the pharaohs who followed, his name does not appear. The timeline of Egypt jumps seamlessly from his father to his successors, as if a 17-year reign of radical transformation, artistic revolution, and religious upheaval was nothing more than a bad dream, a collective fever that the Nile Valley collectively agreed to forget. They called him the heretic, the rebel, or simply that criminal. They stripped him of his flesh, his monuments, his legacy, and his identity, intending to doom his soul to the absolute oblivion of the second death, a state where, because no one speaks your name, you cease to exist in any realm of the universe. Yet, there is a profound irony in the dust beneath you. In their absolute obsession with destroying him, his enemies accidentally preserved him by tearing down his temples and using the shattered blocks as filler inside the massive walls of their own monuments. They inadvertently created a time capsule by burying his city in one frantic, vengeful campaign. They ensured that the shifting sands of the Sahara would protect its foundations from the slow, eroding march of millennia. The very intensity of their hatred left an indelible silhouette in the historical record. They carved away his face, but the shape of the void they left behind is unmistakably his. Listen to the wind as it sweeps through the empty ravines of the eastern cliffs. It carries a low, droning hum, a natural white noise that seems to vibrate through the soles of your feet. This is the sound of absolute isolation. To understand how a man could inspire such a monumental, generational rage, you must understand the world he inherited, a world where religion was not a matter of personal belief, but the literal infrastructure of reality. For nearly 2,000 years before his birth, Egypt had operated like a perfectly balanced machine. The gods were everywhere, woven into the very fabric of daily survival. Osiris ruled the underworld, Isis offered protection, and above all, Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, held the cosmos together from his shadowed sanctuary in the great temple complex of Karnak. In this ancient world, the priesthood of Amun was not just a collection of holy men. They were a corporate titan, a state within a state. They owned more than a third of the arable land in Egypt. They controlled vast fleets of ships on the Nile, thousands of cattle, and an endless stream of gold flowing in from the conquered territories of Nubia and the Levant. They were the gatekeepers to the afterlife, the elite bureaucrats who validated the pharaoh's right to rule. Every king before him had played the game, bowing before the hidden god of Karnak, showering his priests with wealth to ensure their divine endorsement, until he refused. Imagine the sheer, existential terror that must have rippled through the Nile Valley when this young king, born Amenhotep IV, looked upon the vast, wealthy apparatus of the priesthood and decided it was an abomination. He did not merely suggest a reform, he enacted a theological coup d'etat. He declared that Amun was dead. He declared that all the old gods, the jackal-headed, the falcon-winged, the ibis-nosed protectors of the human psyche, were nothing but smoke and illusions. In their place, he elevated a single, abstract deity, the Aten, the literal physical disk of the sun, not a sun god in human form, but the raw, blinding, life-giving energy of the sun itself, reaching down to earth with rays that ended in tiny, delicate hands holding the Ankh, the symbol of life. This was not a subtle shift in theology. It was an apocalyptic rupture to the average Egyptian peasant waking up to find the temples closed, the ancient rituals forbidden, and the names of their beloved gods chiseled off the walls, was equivalent to watching the stars fall from the sky. The universe had lost its anchors, the carefully maintained balance of Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth, justice, and cosmic harmony had been violently overturned by the very man who was sworn to protect it. As you close your eyes and let the warmth of the desert air envelop you, let yourself slip backward through the centuries. Strip away the modern archaeological tents, the paved tourist roads, and the quiet dignity of the ruins. Let the broken stones reassemble themselves in your mind's eye. Watch the white plaster rise up from the sand, catching the fierce morning light. See the gold leaf gleam on the towering flagpoles of the great Aten temple. Feel the frantic, vibrant energy of a city built in a hurry, populated by thousands of frightened courtiers, artists, and soldiers who had abandoned the ancient capital of Thebes to follow a visionary or a madman into the wilderness. You are no longer a modern observer. You are an initiate entering a world of shadows, whispers, and high-stakes political intrigue. You are about to witness the birth of the individual in history, the moment a single human will collide with the oldest, most conservative establishment on earth. The air is thick with the scent of burning myrrh and raw, unbridled ambition. The sun is rising over the eastern cliffs of Akhenaten, and its light is about to expose the profound vulnerability of a king who tried to turn himself into a god, only to be hunted by the ghosts of the gods he tried to kill. You are sitting in the deep, cool shadows of a palace balcony in Thebes, the ancient glittering heart of the Egyptian empire. It is the twilight of the 18th dynasty, a time of unprecedented luxury and staggering wealth. The air around you is heavy with the scent of lotus blossoms, drifting up from palace pools, mingled with the earthy, rich aroma of the Nile mud cooling after a long day under the brutal African sun. From this vantage point, looking out over the sprawling city, you can hear the distant, comforting rhythm of imperial life. The rhythmic thud of mallets from nearby royal workshops, the low chanting of priests performing the evening rites at the nearby Temple of Luxor, and the splash of oars from barges bringing tribute from the edge of the known world. Yet, within the walls of this very palace, a profound, unsettling tension is brewing. It centers around a boy, a young prince, who is completely unlike any heir Egypt has ever seen. His name is Amenhotep, the fourth to bear that name. But he is not the son his father, the magnificent Pharaoh Amenhotep III, had pinned his hopes upon. To understand the psychological fractures that would later tear an empire apart, you must look closely at this boy's childhood, a time spent lingering in the long, intimidating shadow of a golden age. His father, Amenhotep the Magnificent, ruled over an empire at its absolute zenith. He was a master of diplomacy, a king who conquered not with the sword, but with boundless mountains of gold. Under his rule, Egypt was stable, wealthy, and fat. He spent his days commissioning colossal statues of himself, constructing pleasure lakes for his favorite wife, Queen Tai, and presiding over a court that resembled an endless, opulent festival. But behind the gilded facade of this golden age lay a deep, festering anxiety. The young Prince Amenhotep was never meant to rule. He had an older brother, Prince Thutmose, who was the golden child of the family. Thutmose was charismatic, athletic, trained in the arts of war, and deeply embedded in the religious traditions of the state, even serving as a high priest of the sacred Apis bull. Thutmose was the perfect heir, a flawless continuation of the status quo. Then, suddenly, Thutmose died. He vanished from the historical record, leaving behind nothing but a beautifully carved limestone sarcophagus for his pet cat. With the sudden death of his brother, the young, overlooked prince was thrust into the blinding spotlight of imperial expectation, and it was a terrifying fit. If you look at the rare early depictions of the young prince, or read between the lines of court correspondence, a portrait emerges of a deeply introverted, intensely sensitive child who was completely isolated from the traditional masculine ideals of Pharaoh. While previous kings prided themselves on their physical prowess, their ability to wrestle lions, ride chariots at breakneck speeds, and command armies, this prince was sickly, frail, and plagued by an unconventional physical appearance. He possessed an elongated skull, a narrow chest, unusually wide hips, and a soft, protruding abdomen in a court that worshipped physical perfection as a reflection of divine favor. The young prince's body was a silent scandal. He grew up surrounded by walls covered in paintings of perfectly muscled, hyper-masculine ancestors, knowing that he could never live up to that image. This physical alienation undoubtedly bred a profound inner isolation, unable to find validation in the physical world of the hunt or the battlefield. The young prince turned inward, retreating into the deep, labyrinthine corridors of his own mind. He found his sanctuary not in the military barracks, but in the library of the palace, the house of life, and in the company of his mother, Queen Tiye. Tiye was one of the most remarkable women in ancient history. She was not of royal blood. She was the daughter of provincial nobles. Yet she wielded an immense, unprecedented intellect and political authority. She sat beside her husband, not as a passive ornament, but as a brilliant, fierce co-ruler, managing foreign correspondence and domestic policy. From his mother, the young prince learned that power did not just come from the edge of a sword. It came from intellect, from conviction, and from the willingness to challenge established structures. As the old Pharaoh's health began to fail, his body ravaged by painful dental abscesses and severe arthritis, the young prince spent more time observing the true power dynamic of the kingdom, and what he saw disturbed him deeply. Every single day, he watched his father shower the priesthood of Amun with unimaginable wealth. The high priests at Karnak were no longer just servants of the gods. They had become kingmakers. They grew fat on the spoils of war and the taxes of the peasantry. They walked through their vast, sun-dappled temple complexes with an arrogance that rivaled the crown itself. The young prince realized that his father, despite all his gold and colossal statues, was trapped. The monarchy had become a hostage to the very priesthood it had created to legitimize its rule. It was during these lonely, formative years that the seeds of a radical psychological transformation were planted. The prince began to look up at the sky, away from the dark, smoke-filled sanctuaries of Amun, where priests whispered secrets in the dark to maintain their grip on power. He looked at the sun, the one constant, undeniable force in the universe. The sun did not ask for secret rituals in hidden rooms. It did not require a specialized elite to interpret its meaning. It shone equally on the pharaoh in his golden chariot and the poorest peasant washing linen in the mud of the Nile. This was the origin of his obsession. The prince's burgeoning spirituality was not just a religious awakening. It was a deeply personal psychological coping mechanism. In his eyes, the sun, the Aten, became the ultimate father figure, boundless, all-powerful, and completely accepting of him, regardless of his physical frailties. When Amenhotep III finally breathed his last, leaving behind a nation mourning the loss of its golden son, the young prince ascended the Horus throne as Amenhotep IV. The traditionalists in the priesthood undoubtedly breathed a sigh of relief, assuming this strange, frail boy would be easy to manage, a malleable puppet they could direct, while they continued to expand their corporate empire. They could not have been more wrong. They did not understand that behind those quiet, dark eyes lay the mind of a zealot, a young man who had spent his entire life harboring a silent, burning resentment against the old order. He had survived the trauma of his brother's death, the alienation of his own body, and the claustrophobic pressure of court expectations by forging an ironclad, unshakable faith in a new vision of reality. He was no longer just a spectator in the back of the palace. He was now the absolute ruler of the richest empire on earth, and he was about to unleash a psychological storm that would shake the foundations of Egypt to their very core. You are standing inside the towering stone gateway of the Temple of Karnak, and the air around you is vibrating with an unbearable, suffocating tension. It is the 5th year of the young king's reign, and the ancient city of Thebes has become a psychological pressure cooker. For the past 48 months, the traditional power structures of Egypt have been watching their new ruler with a mixture of disbelief, escalating panic, and a growing, silent fury. They had expected a quiet boy who could be easily managed, a fragile heir who would spend his days hiding in the luxury of his palaces, while the high priests of Amun continued to run the empire. Instead, they find themselves locked in a cold war with a radical visionary who is systematically dismantling the foundation of their world, brick by bitter brick. Step out of the blinding Egyptian heat and into the monumental courtyard that the young king, still calling himself Amenhotep IV, has aggressively constructed right outside the eastern perimeter of the traditional temple. Look up at the massive pillars. The architecture here does not comfort the soul. It shocks the senses. It breaks every rule of artistic proportion that Egypt has held sacred for 2,000 years. Instead of the idealized, muscular, timeless figures of previous pharaohs, the colossal statues towering over you present a visage that is deeply unsettling, almost alien. The king has ordered his sculptors to carve his likeness exactly as he perceives himself, or perhaps as he wishes to be understood symbolically. You see a towering figure with a spectacularly elongated face, heavy drooping eyelids that seem to look right through you, thick, sensuous lips, a long, hollow neck, and a jawline that tapers into a sharp, prominent chin. His torso is narrow and delicate, yet it flows down into heavily exaggerated, feminine hips, a soft swelling belly, and long, spindly thighs. To the traditional priests walking past these monuments, this is not just bad art, it is an existential abomination. It is a violent disruption of Ma'at, the cosmic balance. In ancient Egypt, art was not a matter of personal expression, it was a magical tool used to maintain the order of the universe. To alter the proportions of the pharaoh was to alter the structure of reality itself. Yet, the young king stands before these statues, not with shame, but with an absolute, unshakable confidence. He has rejected the old, static lies of perfection. He is demanding that the world look at him exactly as he is. A unique being, a singular conduit through which the divine energy of the cosmos flows. Beside him stands a woman whose beauty and intellect match his own revolutionary fervor, Queen Nefertiti. Her name translates literally to "a beautiful woman has come," but she is far more than a consort or a passive ornament of the court. Watch her as she moves through the temple complex, her head held high beneath a unique, tall, flat-topped blue crown that she designed for herself. She does not walk 3 paces behind her husband, as queens have done for centuries. She walks directly beside him, his equal in every ritual, his partner in this dangerous theological gamble. The bond between them is displayed openly, with an unprecedented, shocking intimacy that scandalizes the conservative court. In royal reliefs, they are shown holding hands, leaning in to kiss each other while riding in their golden chariots and bouncing their young daughters on their knees. This is not merely a display of genuine romantic affection, it is a calculated political strategy. By elevating his family life to the status of a divine myth, the king is presenting himself and Nefertiti as the primal couple, the earthly manifestations of the male and female principles of creation. They are the new trinity, the Aten in the sky, and the king and queen on earth. If you want to pray to the sun, you can no longer go through the traditional priesthood. You must pray through them. This economic stranglehold is where the true battle lines are drawn. The high priest of Amun, who once controlled the largest financial empire in the ancient world, watch in silent rage as the king systematically chokes off their funding. The endless caravans of gold, cattle, and fine linens coming from foreign conquests are no longer being delivered to the storehouses of Karnak. Instead, they are being diverted to the king's new building projects. The vast estates owned by the Amun priesthood are being taxed, their accounts audited by royal officials, who answer only to the crown. Imagine the whispers in the dark corridors of the old temples, the priests, the military generals, the old bureaucrats who have served the dynasty for generations. They realize that this is no longer a temporary whim of an eccentric young monarch. This is an organized, top-down revolution designed to wipe them out. The tension reaches a breaking point when the king issues an edict that sends a shockwave through the entire length of the Nile Valley. He announces that he will no longer bear the name given to him at birth. He rejects the name Amenhotep, which means Amun is satisfied, because Amun is no longer his god. He proclaims that from this day forward, he shall be known as Akhenaten, he who is effective for the Aten. With a single decree, he cuts the umbilical cord linking him to his ancestors, his father's legacy, and the history of his city. But he does not stop there. He looks around the ancient capital of Thebes, a city saturated with the ghosts of the old gods, a city where every stone, every monument, and every street corner breathes the name of Amun. He realizes that you cannot build a new universe on top of the ruins of an old corruption. The air here is poisoned by centuries of priestly plotting and conservative resistance. He needs a clean slate. He needs a place where no god has ever been worshipped before, a place that belongs purely to him and his son. Turn your gaze northward, away from the crowded, angry streets of Thebes, and follow the royal barge as it sails down the Nile into the brutal, untouched wilderness of Middle Egypt. Imagine the journey, a grand flotilla of gilded ships cutting through the brown waters of the river, carrying thousands of frightened, disoriented courtiers, scribes, artists, and soldiers who have been ordered to pack up their entire lives and follow their radical king into a barren wasteland. They drop anchor at a spot where the high desert cliffs recede from the river, forming a massive, natural crescent-shaped bay of sand and rock. It is a desolate, forbidding place, completely untouched by agriculture or human habitation. It is a blank canvas. The king steps off his royal barge onto the virgin sand. He stands beneath the blazing midday sun, raises his golden scepter toward the sky, and declares that this is the spot. He claims that the Aten itself guided him here, pointing out the horizon where the sun rises precisely between two distant hilltops, perfectly mimicking the hieroglyph for horizon, the Akhet. He names this patch of wasteland Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. With an almost terrifying, manic energy, Akhenaten commands that a great city be raised from the dust in a matter of months. He sets boundaries around the plain, carving 14 massive boundary stelae directly into the limestone cliffs. On these monumental stones, he swears a sacred, binding oath to his god. He will never expand the boundaries of this city, and more importantly, he will never leave it. He has voluntarily exiled himself from the rest of Egypt, locking himself inside a self-created sanctuary of white plaster and gold leaf. Watch the thousands of workers as they toil under the whip of royal overseers, working through the night by the light of oil lamps to fulfill the king's impossible timeline. They do not use the traditional, massive stone blocks that take years to quarry and transport. Instead, they invent a new, revolutionary construction technique using small, standardized mud bricks and limestone blocks called talatat. These blocks are small enough for a single man to carry on his shoulder, allowing buildings to rise from the desert floor like a mirage, constructed at a breakneck, frantic pace. The great palaces rise. The long straight avenues are paved. Massive temples are built with a radical architectural layout. Unlike the old temples of Amun, which were dark, labyrinthine, and hidden deep within windowless stone sanctuaries, the great temple of the Aten is completely open to the sky. It features hundreds of stone altars arranged in vast, open-air courtyards, designed so that the blinding rays of the sun can beat down directly upon the offerings of meat, fruit, and flowers. There are no statues of the god here. There is only the sky, the light, and the heat. As you walk through these newly finished, whitewashed streets, you can feel the fragile, artificial nature of this paradise. On the surface, it is a triumph of human will over nature, a glittering metropolis born from a desert waste. The walls are covered in vibrant, stunning frescoes of nature, birds bursting from papyrus marshes, fish leaping from crystalline ponds, calves gamboling through meadows. The king has unlocked a magnificent, breathing realism in Egyptian art, free from the rigid shackles of the past. But beneath the surface, the air is thick with paranoia. This city is a gilded cage. The courtiers who followed Akhenaten here did not do so out of pure religious devotion. They did so because their survival depended on it. If you look at the private tombs, they began digging for themselves in the northern and southern cliffs. You will notice a deeply chilling detail. In every single tomb, the traditional scenes of the tomb owner's life, his achievements, and his family are gone. Instead, every wall is covered in giant images of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The tomb owners are depicted as tiny, bowing figures, completely subservient to the royal couple. The elite of Amarna have surrendered their own identities to appease the psychological obsession of their king. They realize that in this city, there is only one source of life, one source of wealth, and one source of air: the favor of Pharaoh. The ascent is complete. Akhenaten has successfully cut his ties to the past, broken the power of the priesthood, and built a magnificent capital dedicated entirely to his singular vision. He sits upon his throne in the center of his new horizon, surrounded by a court that bows to his every word, believing he has successfully bent the universe to his will. But as the desert wind begins to howl through the canyons surrounding his city, it carries a cold, dark truth. You cannot declare war on the gods of a nation and expect them to remain silent forever. The old world is waiting outside his borders, watching, planning, and biding its time. You are standing in the middle of the royal road of Akhenaten at precisely noon, and the world around you is bleached completely white by a sun that does not merely shine, but actively assaults the earth. The heat here is a physical entity, a heavy, vibrating weight that presses down upon your chest and makes the horizon warp and shimmer like fluid glass. If you look up, you cannot look directly at the sky. The Aten is a blinding, tyrannical eye, casting zero shadows and demanding absolute surrender from every living thing beneath it. Listen closely to the unique, eerie soundscape of this city at its absolute zenith. There is no sound of children playing in these grand, whitewashed avenues. There are no crowded, chaotic marketplaces filled with the raucous bartering of common citizens that you would find in Thebes or Memphis. Instead, the air is filled with the rhythmic, synchronized clatter of elite chariot wheels patrolling the limestone-paved streets, the heavy, echoing footfalls of foreign mercenaries, Medjay scouts, Libyan archers, and Syrian guards, and the constant, low, monotonous droning of thousands of voices chanting hymns to the sun disk from the open-air courtyards of the great temple. This is the pinnacle of Akhenaten's isolation, the moment where his grand experiment has become completely severed from the reality of the human condition. Walk down the grand central axis of the city toward the king's house, a sprawling palace complex connected to the great official palace by a magnificent, monumental wooden bridge that spans directly across the royal road. High up on this bridge, cutting through the sky like a gilded balcony, sits the window of appearances. This is the literal focal point of the Amarna universe, the precise stage where the psychological illusion of the regime is maintained. Look up and you can see them. Akhenaten and Nefertiti stand within the gilded frame of the window, leaning over cushions covered in rich, crimson textiles. They are draped in pleated garments of linen, so fine it is virtually translucent, shimmering like water under the intense glare of their god. From this height, they throw down rewards to their loyal servants. Heavy collars of solid gold beads, intricately carved signet rings, and expensive jars of perfumed ointments. Watch the courtiers below. These are the highest officials of the land. Men who once held positions of immense dignity in the old courts of Egypt. Now, they are trapped in an endless, degrading performance of absolute submission. They do not merely bow, they prostrate themselves fully on the stone pavement, their faces pressed into the dust, their arms outstretched in a desperate, frantic display of adoration. They know that in this city, if the king turns his face away from you, you do not just lose your job, you lose your right to exist. You cease to receive the breath of life that Akhenaten claims to distribute on behalf of the sun. Enter the private quarters of the palace, leaving the performative theater of the window of appearances behind. Here, in the deep, shaded rooms, cooled by ingenious architectural wind catchers, the atmosphere changes from triumphant celebration to a suffocating, insular intimacy. This is where the true psychological tragedy of the Amarna period unfolds. The royal family has locked themselves inside a beautifully decorated bubble, completely oblivious to, or deliberately ignoring, the storm that is gathering outside their desert walls. Look at the walls of these private chambers. The painted plaster reliefs show a family unit that seems entirely consumed by its own internal affection. You see Akhenaten cradling his eldest daughter, Meritaten, gently kissing her forehead while she plays with the delicate gold tassels of his crown. You see Nefertiti holding two of their younger daughters, Ankhesenpaten and Meketaten, on her lap, their small hands reaching up to touch the intricate details of her jewelry. It is an image of domestic bliss that is unique in the entire history of ancient monarchy. But look closer at the details, and the cracks in the psychological facade begin to show. The art of this period has moved past the initial, shocking exaggerations of the king's ascent and settled into a strange, mannered, and deeply melancholic style. The faces of the king and his family are no longer just alien. They look exhausted, their eyes are heavy, downcast, shrouded in a profound, existential weariness. The lines around Akhenaten's mouth are deep, carved by years of relentless, unyielding stress. He has taken on a burden that no single human mind was ever designed to bear. By destroying the traditional priesthoods, he did not just eliminate political rivals, He eliminated the entire bureaucratic infrastructure of the state. In the old days, if a canal in a distant province collapsed, the local governor and the local temple priesthood handled it. If a minor border dispute erupted in the Levant, the regional military commanders resolved it. The universe ran itself through thousands of decentralized nodes of traditional authority. Not anymore. Akhenaten has centralized everything into his own person. He is the only priest. He is the only lawmaker. He is the only administrator. Every petition, every military report, every agricultural crisis must pass through him, because he is the sole representative of the divine order on earth. He spends his nights huddled over oil lamps, reading through piles of papyrus documents written in cuneiform, the international diplomatic script of the Bronze Age, trying to manage an empire that is slowly, irreversibly slipping through his fingers. Step into the archive room of the royal palace, where the famous Amarna letters are stored. These are hundreds of baked clay tablets, written by foreign kings and vassal rulers from Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni, and the fractured city-states of Canaan. Pick up one of these tablets and read the frantic, desperate words etched into the clay. The language is raw, filled with a rising panic that contrasts sharply with the peaceful, serene art on the palace walls. The vassal rulers of the Levant are screaming for help. For generations, Egypt had maintained its empire through a brilliant combination of military intimidation and golden diplomacy. But now, the Hittites, a fierce, aggressive empire rising from the rugged highlands of Anatolia, are moving southward, swallowing up Egyptian territories and instigating rebellions among local chieftains. One tablet, written by Rib-Hadda, the deeply loyal king of the ancient port city of Byblos, reads like a psychological thriller. Why does the king, my lord, hold back from me? The enemy is at our gates. My cities are falling one by one. If the king does not send troops, if the king does not send archers, I am a dead man, and the land of the king will be lost. I write to my lord, but my lord does not answer. Is there no breath left in Egypt? Akhenaten reads these letters, but he does not send the armies. He does not ride out in his chariot to defend his borders. Why? Some historians have argued he was a pacifist, a man so devoted to his religion of love and light that he could not stomach the brutality of war. But the reality is far darker, far more psychologically complex. Akhenaten cannot leave Akhenaten. He is bound by the solemn, sacred oath he carved into the boundary stelae surrounding his city. To leave his horizon would be to admit that his system was flawed, to concede that the physical world of politics and warfare was more powerful than the spiritual utopia he had constructed for his God. He has become a hostage to his own dogma. In his mind, if he simply maintains the purity of his rituals, if he continues to offer enough meat and wine on the altars of the sun, the Aten will provide. The spiritual order will fix the material world. He retreats further into his isolation, closing the doors of his palace to the ugly, chaotic reality of foreign affairs. He surrounds himself with yes men, with low-born officials whom he has elevated to high positions precisely because they have no independent power base. They owe everything to him, so they tell him exactly what he wants to hear. They tell him that the empire is secure. They tell him that the harvest along the Nile is bountiful. They tell him that the people love him, but they are lying. Outside the pristine white walls of Amarna, Egypt is suffering. The economic collapse caused by the closure of the traditional temples has triggered a severe depression. The trade networks that relied on temple wealth have broken down. The common people, stripped of their household gods, live in terror. They no longer have the protective amulets of Bes to safeguard their children during childbirth. They no longer have the prayers to Anubis to ensure their parents pass safely into the afterlife. They feel abandoned, left completely vulnerable to the dark, malicious forces of the cosmos. And then, the ultimate tragedy strikes. The physical world that Akhenaten has tried so hard to exclude breaks through his boundaries in the most cruel, devastating way possible. A terrible plague, perhaps brought into the city by foreign prisoners of war or trading ships, sweeps through the crowded quarters of Amarna. It respects no royal titles. It does not fear the rays of the sun. Enter the royal tomb, carved deep into the lonely, desolate ravines of the eastern cliffs. Far away from the city, walk down the steep, dark limestone steps, lit by the flickering orange glow of torches. Here, the imagery of domestic happiness is shattered forever. Carved directly into the rock is a scene of raw, unmitigated grief that is unprecedented in royal art. You see Akhenaten and Nefertiti standing over a stone bed. On the bed lies the body of their second daughter, Princess Meketaten. She has died of the plague, or perhaps in childbirth, still a young girl. The king is not standing with imperial stoicism. He is bent over, his face buried in his hands, his body racked with deep human sobs. He is clutching his wife's hand, but Nefertiti cannot comfort him. Her own head is bowed in absolute, crushing sorrow. Behind them, royal nurses weep openly, tearing their clothes and pouring dust over their heads. In this dark, cold chamber, beneath the earth, the illusion of the Amarna period dies. The king who claimed to be the sole lord of life, the man who believed he had conquered death through his devotion to the sun, stands helpless before the cold, silent corpse of his own child. The Aten did not reach down its golden hands to save her. The light did not drive away the darkness. Akhenaten stands in the flickering torchlight, looking at the dead face of his daughter, realizing for the first time the terrifying price of his isolation. He has cut himself off from his people, from his history, and from reality itself. He has built a city of light, but he is now completely surrounded by shadows. And as he climbs the stairs back up to the surface, leaving his child in the dark, he can feel the cold breath of the universe catching up to him. The fracturing of his empire has begun, and the end is no longer a distant threat. It is waiting for him just outside the door. You are stepping back into the private audience hall of the royal palace, but the air is no longer filled with the triumphant, radiant warmth of the sun. It is heavy, damp, and smells of stagnant water and cold wax. The oil lamps are flickering low, casting long, distorted shadows across the vibrant nature frescoes on the floor. The painted birds and fish, once so full of life, now look trapped, frozen in a silent plaster world. It is the 16th year of Akhenaten's reign, and the grand illusion of Akhenaten is collapsing under the unbearable weight of reality. The paradise of light has become a claustrophobic fortress of paranoia. Look at the king. He is sitting on his low, ebony throne, but he no longer holds himself with the proud, unyielding posture of a divine revolutionary. He is a broken man, physically and psychologically shattered. The lines on his face are no longer just expressions of weariness. They are deep, raw scars left by an agonizing, internal disintegration. His hands are trembling as he clutches a bundle of frantic, tear-stained letters from his border commanders. He does not read them. He knows what they say. The empire is bleeding out, and the blood is on his hands. Beside the throne, there is a devastating, echoing void. Nefertiti is gone. The woman who was his anchor, the queen who stood beside him at the window of appearances and shared his radical dream, has vanished from the official records in the 14th year of his reign. Did she die of the same brutal plague that claimed their daughter? Was she banished to the northern palace after a bitter ideological fracture, unable to support her husband's escalating, mad extremism? Or did she, as some tantalizing clues suggest, undergo a terrifying transformation of her own, changing her name to Smenkhkare, stepping into the shadows as a male co-regent, trying desperately to hold the collapsing reins of state power, while Akhenaten slipped further into dementia? We may never know the precise truth, but the psychological impact of her absence is undeniable. Akhenaten is utterly alone. His isolation is no longer a political strategy. It is a mental prison. Without Nefertiti's grounding intellect, his religious devotion has curdled into a manic, desperate fanaticism. He has realized that his silent war against the old gods has failed. The people of Egypt are not embracing the Aten. They are secretly praying to their ancient protectors in the dark, blaming the king's heresy for the plague, the inflation, and the humiliating loss of foreign territories. In a frantic, vengeful attempt to force the universe to submit to his will, Akhenaten unleashes a campaign of domestic terror that borders on madness. He issues a new, absolute decree. The name of Amun must not just be ignored, it must be completely obliterated from the face of the earth. Imagine the squads of royal iconoclasts, armed with heavy iron chisels, mallets, and ladders, entering every city, town, and village along the Nile. They are the purity squads of the sun. They march into the ancient, silent temples, their boots echoing on the sacred flagstones. They climb up the towering obelisks, scramble over the roofs of monumental pylons, and enter the deepest, darkest burial vaults of past kings. Their mission is total eradication. Wherever the hieroglyphs for Amun appear, they strike. They gouge out the name with a terrifying, rhythmic violence. They do not care if the name is carved into a sacred text, a treaty with a foreign nation, or the private domestic funerary stelae of a poor family's beloved grandfather. They erase it. They move into the royal tombs, defacing the monuments of Akhenaten's own ancestors. They climb up to the grand reliefs of his father, Amenhotep III, and violently hack away the first part of the king's name, leaving behind only the mutilated, scarred stone. They even enter the dark private chambers where the records of the state are kept, scratching out the word gods. Wherever it is written in the plural, there can be only one. This is no longer a theological reform. It is an act of supreme psychological desperation. It is the behavior of a man who knows he is losing his grip on reality, trying to fix an internal collapse by exerting an absolute, tyrannical control over the external world. He is trying to force his people into a collective amnesia, believing that if he can erase the memory of the old gods, he can change the trajectory of his failing destiny. But you cannot chisel away the soul of a nation. The deeper the royal chisels cut into the stone, the deeper the resentment grows in the hearts of the population. The military, once the proud, invincible sword of the 18th dynasty, is pushing back. General Horemheb, the brilliant, iron-willed commander-in-chief of the Egyptian army, stands in his barracks at Memphis, watching his soldiers grow restless and angry. They have spent years training for glory, yet they are forced to sit idle while the Hittite war machine swallows up the rich trading hubs of the Levant. They watch their brothers in arms return from the border, mutilated and defeated, bringing home tales of catastrophic loss and imperial humiliation. Horemheb looks toward the desert capital of Amarna with a cold, professional, detached hatred. He is a pragmatic man, a soldier who believes in order, stability, and the absolute authority of the state. He sees Akhenaten not as a god, but as an existential threat to the survival of Egypt. He begins to form silent, dangerous alliances with the remnants of the old Amun priesthood, who are living in poverty and exile, biding their time in the shadows of the ruined temples of Thebes. They are waiting for a single spark, a single moment of vulnerability to strike back. And that moment arrives in the winter of his 17th year on the throne. The details of Akhenaten's death are shrouded in a dense, deliberate fog of historical sabotage. There are no grand accounts of his final hours. No royal scribes recorded his last words. Did he die peacefully in his bed, his frail body finally giving out under the immense crushing stress of his failing universe? Was he quietly poisoned by a desperate courtier who realized that the king was dragging the entire nation into an apocalyptic abyss? Or did his own military generals simply step into his chamber and close the curtain on his life? Whatever the physical cause, the psychological reality is clear. When Akhenaten closed his eyes for the last time, the sun set on his horizon forever. He left behind a city filled with terrified, desperate people, and an empire on the absolute brink of a civil war. Imagine the immediate aftermath of his death. The transition of power is a chaotic, frantic scramble in the dark. A shadowy figure named Smenkhkare rules for a few brief, bleeding months, attempting to maintain the line, but vanishes almost instantly into the dust of history. The true, fragile weight of the crown falls upon the small, delicate shoulders of a child, a 9-year-old boy named Tutankhaten. He is Akhenaten's son, born to a lesser wife, or perhaps a nephew, an innocent boy who has spent his entire short life inside the pristine, artificial bubble of Amarna. He knows nothing of the old world outside the walls. He has been raised to believe that his father was a god, that the Aten was the only lord of the universe, and that the white city of Akhenaten was the center of the cosmos. Watch this 9-year-old boy as he sits on the grand golden throne of his father, his small feet dangling above the footstool, completely surrounded by a circle of older, predatory men. On one side stands I, the veteran court bureaucrat, a master of political survival who has served 3 pharaohs and knows exactly how to adapt to the shifting winds of power. On the other side stands General Horemheb, his hand resting heavily on the pommel of his bronze sword, his eyes fixed on the child king with an iron, unyielding intensity. They do not ask the boy what he wants. They tell him what he must do if he wishes to live. They explain to him, in cold, clinical terms, that his father's dream was a madness, a sickness that has brought Egypt to its knees. They tell him that if he does not dismantle his father's universe immediately, the army will rebel, the priests will curse his soul, and his throat will be cut in the dark. The psychological trauma inflicted on this child must have been total. To save his own life, he is forced to become the executioner of his father's legacy. In the 3rd year of his reign, the child king issues an extraordinary public decree of capitulation carved into a massive stone slab known to history as the Restoration Stela. The words are a brutal, public condemnation of everything Akhenaten stood for. The stela proclaims, to seal this total surrender to the old order, the boy is forced to change his identity. He strips the name of his father's god from his own flesh. He ceases to be Tutankhaten. He becomes Tutankhamun. Watch the tragic, heartbreaking evacuation of Akhenaten. It is not a gradual departure. It is a panicked, stampeding flight. The order is given that the city must be abandoned completely, returned to the desert waste from which it was born. Thousands of citizens, the artists, the scribes, the court officials who had built their lives here, pack up what few belongings they can carry onto carts and donkeys. They leave their houses fully furnished, their storage jars filled with grain, their beautiful garden pools open to the sky. They turn their backs on the city of light and begin the long, humiliating march back to Thebes. The child king Tutankhamun is led away, a hostage to the new regime, leaving his father's great city to the mercy of the Sahara. The white plaster begins to crack under the relentless heat. The gold leaf peels away from the temple gates, catching the wind and drifting into the sand like dry leaves. The great open-air altars of the Yaten, once piled high with fresh flowers and rich wines, are silent, slowly buried by the creeping, red dunes of the desert. Akhenaten's horizon has fractured into 1,000,000 pieces. The old gods have returned. Their sanctuaries are being reopened, and their priests are returning to their wealth with a renewed, ravenous appetite for vengeance. The heretic king is dead, his city is abandoned, and his son has betrayed his name. But for his enemies, this is not enough. A simple death is too merciful for the man who tried to kill the gods. The true, systematic campaign of total annihilation is about to begin. You are moving through the absolute, suffocating blackness of an underground vault in the Valley of the Kings. The air here has not moved in more than 30 centuries. It is dead, dry, and intensely cold, smelling of ancient stone dust, decaying linen, and the bitter, sharp tang of mineral salts used in the preservation of the dead. As you lift your torch, its fragile, orange flame dances across the walls, casting giant, leaping shadows that look like predatory beasts waiting in the dark. Look down at the floor of this hidden chamber, which archaeologists will one day name Tomb KV55. There are no grand golden shrines here. There are no beautifully painted walls depicting a triumphant journey into the fields of the blessed. Instead, the floor is littered with a chaotic, violent wreckage that tells a story of an unimaginable, deeply personal hatred. Before you lies a magnificent, anthropoid wooden coffin, covered from head to toe in a shimmering sheet of pure gold leaf, and inlaid with delicate, vibrant bands of carnelian, glass, and lapis lazuli. It is a masterpiece of imperial art, a vessel designed to carry a royal soul into eternity. But look closer at what has been done to it. The face of the coffin, the gilded mask, meant to represent the eternal features of the deceased, has been completely and brutally ripped off. It was not stolen by common tomb robbers looking for gold. The gold leaf around the edges remains untouched. The face was chiseled away with a cold, deliberate precision, leaving behind a jagged, hollow void where a human countenance should be. Now, direct the light of your torch to the hieroglyphic inscriptions running down the center of the coffin lid. These are the sacred prayers that identify the occupant. the magic spells that allow the gods of the underworld to greet the dead by name. Every single royal cartouche has been systematically excised. The gold has been peeled back, and the stone underneath has been aggressively planed down with a copper adze. The person lying inside this coffin was deliberately stripped of his identity at the very moment of his burial, turned into a nameless, faceless non-entity, stranded forever in the twilight zone between existence and nothingness. This is the work of the great eraser. This is the final, devastating climax of the campaign to wipe Akhenaten from the memory of the living and the dead. The true architect of this total annihilation was not the boy King Tutankhamun, who died tragically young before he could ever truly establish his own independent will. The true fury of the restoration was unleashed a few years later, when the old soldier, General Horemheb, finally seized the Horus throne for himself. Horemheb was not of royal blood. He was a self-made military man who viewed the entire Amarna period not just as a religious deviation, but as a dangerous, treasonous stain on the honor of Egypt. He decided that it was not enough to simply abandon the city of Akhenaten. Every single physical trace of the heretic's existence had to be hunted down and thoroughly ground into dust. Imagine the sheer scale of the labor Horemheb commanded. It was an industrial-scale campaign of historical editing. Teams of state-sponsored workers marched through the ruins of Amarna like a swarm of locusts. They did not just let the desert swallow the buildings, they actively tore them down. They smashed the beautiful, open-air stone temples of the Aten into millions of fragments. They pulled down the grand palaces, shattered the colossal statues of the king into unmappable splinters, and threw the debris into deep, forgotten quarries. The beautiful boundary, stelae carved into the high cliffs, the massive stones where Akhenaten had carved his sacred oaths to his god, were targeted with an almost manic vengeance. Workers swung heavy mallets against the solid rock, shattering the figures of the king, his wife Nefertiti, and their daughters, turning their bodies into unrecognizable scars on the limestone face of the mountain. But Horemheb's most ingenious and most sinister act of destruction took place across the river, back at the ancient religious capital of Thebes. He did not throw away the hundreds of thousands of decorated limestone blocks, the talatat, that Akhenaten had used to build his sun temples. Instead, Horemheb used them as structural garbage. He utilized them as cheap, inner filler for the massive new pylons and towers he was constructing at the Temple of Karnak to honor Amun-Ra. Think about the profound psychological cruelty of this act. The very stones that had been carved with images of Akhenaten worshipping his sun disk, stones filled with light, movement, and life, were stuffed inside the dark, hollow bellies of the giant walls of his worst enemies. They were buried alive in the masonry, doomed to spend eternity in total, crushing darkness, carrying the heavy weight of the old gods they had tried to replace. Akhenaten's legacy was literally turned into the foundational bricks of the resurrected priesthood of Amun. Then came the rewrite of time itself. Horemheb ordered the royal scribes to revise the official histories of Egypt. In the grand archives of Memphis and Thebes, the 17th year reign of Akhenaten was completely expunged. The brief reigns of his immediate successors, Smenkhkare and Tutankhamun, were likewise wiped from the records. In the eyes of the state, these kings had never lived. Their years on the throne were officially added to the reign of Horemheb, as if he had directly succeeded Akhenaten's father, Amenhotep III. The entire 17-year period of artistic religious, and political revolution was compressed into a single dark, nameless blank space, an official historical black hole. For more than 3,000 years, the strategy worked perfectly. The classical world, the Greeks, the Romans, the early Christian scholars who traveled through Egypt never heard the name Akhenaten. They marveled at the pyramids of Giza. They cataloged the conquests of Thutmose III, and they trembled before the colossal monuments of Rameses the Great. But of the king who had invented the concept of a single god, they knew absolutely nothing. He had truly suffered the second death. He had become a ghost trapped in an invisible prison of sand and forgotten stone, until the earth began to speak again. The resurrection of Akhenaten is one of the greatest plot twists in human history. His enemies had destroyed him with a terrifying efficiency, but in doing so, they left behind a puzzle that the modern mind could not resist. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists began digging into the ruined mounds of Amarna, expecting to find nothing more than a minor provincial outpost. Instead, they stumbled upon the foundations of a massive, lost metropolis. They found the Amarna letters, the baked clay tablets that revealed the collapse of the Bronze Age geopolitical landscape. They found the private tombs in the cliffs, their defaced walls still preserving the faint, beautiful outlines of a family that had loved each other with an unprecedented public intimacy. And in 1912, inside the sand-choked workshop of an ancient sculptor named Thutmose, a German excavator brushed away the dust of 3 millennia and looked into the eyes of the bust of Nefertiti. The discovery of that single, breathtaking piece of sculpture shattered the silence of centuries. Nefertiti's face, with its perfect symmetry, its long swan-like neck, and its expression of serene, timeless power, became an instant global icon. The world became obsessed with the story behind that face. Who was she? Who was the husband who had loved her so intensely? What was this strange, white city in the desert that had vanished so completely from the history books? As scholars began systematically dismantling the massive pylons of Karnak for restoration, the hidden Talatat blocks began to emerge from the darkness of the walls, like ghosts stepping out of a tomb. Thousands of scattered pieces of the puzzle were brought out into the light. Computer programs were used to match the fragments, reassembling the shattered reliefs of Akhenaten's temples like a giant stone jigsaw puzzle. For the first time in 3,000 years, humans were reading the words of the great hymn to the Aten, a poem likely composed by Akhenaten himself, which bears a striking, uncanny resemblance to Psalm 104 of the Hebrew Bible. How manifold it is, what thou hast made. They are hidden from the face of man. O sole God, like whom there is no other, thou didst create the world according to thy desire, whilst thou wert alone. The ultimate historical irony is now complete. The very pharaohs who spent their entire lives trying to erase Akhenaten from existence inadvertently guaranteed his immortality. If Akhenaten's city had survived, if his temple had been left standing, they would have been altered, rebuilt, and written over by subsequent generations. Just like every other monument in Egypt, they would have been worn away by the slow, eroding teeth of time. But because his city was violently flattened and buried in a single generation, it remained pristine, an untouched archaeological time capsule waiting beneath the sand. Akhenaten's enemies thought they were burying a corpse. Instead, they were planting a seed. As you stand in the deep silence of KV 55, watching your torchlight flicker over the faceless, nameless, golden coffin, you realize that the erasure failed. The modern world knows more about Akhenaten, his family, his psychology, and his inner life than almost any other pharaoh in the long history of the Nile. His name is spoken in every language on earth. His radical ideas are debated in universities across the globe. His face, though chiseled away from the stone, has been reassembled in the human imagination. The echoes in the dark have become a deafening roar. The heretic king has broken through his prison of silence. He has survived the second death, and he has returned from the shadows of oblivion to confront the world with the eternal, haunting question of his legacy. Was he a madman who nearly destroyed his country for an impossible illusion, or was he the world's first true individual, a lonely prophet of light who was born 3,000 years too soon? You are sitting on a smooth, weathered block of limestone at the highest vantage point of the eastern cliffs, watching the final, bleeding remnants of the Egyptian sun slide beneath the western desert. The sky above you is no longer a bright, blinding canvas of imperial gold. It has deepened into an immense velvet wash of violet, indigo, and smoky amber. Down below, the great plain of Amarna is slowly being swallowed by the cold, blue shadows of the night. The jagged lines of the broken foundations, the shattered remnants of the great temple, and the empty avenues that once bustled with the frantic, nervous energy of a religious revolution are all dissolving into the uniform, dark stillness of the desert floor. Take a long, deep, deliberate breath. The air has shifted. The punishing, oppressive heat of the afternoon has dissolved, replaced by a cool, clean, and incredibly gentle northern breeze that sweeps down the Nile Valley, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp earth and river reeds. It is a quietness so absolute that you can hear the soft, rhythmic rustling of the desert sand as it settles into the crevices of the ancient stones. It is the sound of time itself, smoothing over the rough, violent edges of human history. This is the hour of absolute peace. This is the moment where the frantic ambitions, the political betrayals, the psychological traumas, and the multi-generational hatreds of the Amarna period finally lose their sting. From this height, looking down at the quiet grave of a city, the immense weight of Akhenaten's story begins to settle into something profound, meditative, and beautifully still. Let your mind drift across the vast expanse of the centuries. Think of the incredible, terrifying journey you have witnessed. You have watched a frail, overlooked prince survive the crushing weight of a golden childhood, transforming his physical alienation into an ironclad, unyielding vision of a new universe. You saw him ascend the oldest throne on earth, challenge a corporate priesthood that had held reality hostage for millennia, and build a glittering metropolis of white plaster and gold leaf from the virgin sands of a barren wasteland. You witnessed the peak of his isolation, the devastating, human heartbreak of his daughter's death, the slow, agonizing collapse of his empire, and the systematic, vengeful campaign that attempted to erase his very soul from the fabric of time. And yet, as you sit here in the gathering dark, you realize that the silence of this desert is not a defeat. It is a sanctuary. There is a strange, comforting beauty in the absolute stillness of this place. The pharaohs who followed Akhenaten, Horemheb, Seti, Rameses the Great, spent an unimaginable amount of human energy, wealth, and labor trying to hunt down his memory. They swung their heavy mallets, they sharpened their copper chisels, they stuffed his sacred stones into the dark bellies of their temple walls, and they proudly declared to the gods that the heretic had been utterly destroyed, wiped from the timeline, as if he had never breathed. But look at what remains of their grand vengeance. Where are those proud, triumphant kings now? They, too, are nothing but dust, sleeping in deep, dark vaults in the Valley of the Kings, their golden treasures locked behind museum glass, their empires long since crumbled into the textbooks of history, their frantic attempt to control time, to dictate who would be remembered and who would be forgotten, was ultimately an illusion. The desert did not care about their decrees. The river did not remember their names any more than it remembered the name of the heretic. In the end, the universe has a way of balancing its own books. By burying Akhenaten's city in a single violent campaign of hatred, his enemies inadvertently granted him the most pristine, uncorrupted immortality an ancient human could ever hope for. They preserved his thoughts, his art, his failures, and his humanity in a perfect subterranean time capsule. They tried to turn him into a void, but the void they left behind became the most fascinating mystery in the story of civilization. Close your eyes and let the cool, night wind wash over your face. Let the tension in your shoulders melt away into the deep, ancient earth beneath you. In this quiet darkness, the boundaries between the past and the present begin to soften and blur. You are no longer an observer trying to decipher the broken fragments of an ancient text. You are a fellow traveler through the brief, flickering corridor of human existence. The story of Akhenaten is not just a historical chronicle of an Egyptian king who lived and died 3,000 years ago. It is a deeply personal, psychological mirror that reflects the vulnerabilities of the human condition. It is a story about the profound loneliness of being completely misunderstood. It is about the danger of retreating so deeply into our own private utopias that we lose our anchor to the real world around us. It is about the heartbreaking reality that no matter how much power, how much gold, or how much devotion we possess, we cannot protect the things we love from the slow, indifferent march of decay and mortality. Yet, there is an immense comfort in that realization. Akhenaten's life was a tempest of stress, anxiety, and unyielding conflict. He spent his nights huddled over flickering oil lamps, his mind burning with a manic, desperate zeal to reshape the cosmos, his heart breaking over the cold body of his child, his ears ringing with the distant, approaching thunder of his failing empire. He carried a burden that was far too heavy for a single human soul to bear. But now, that tempest is over. The storm has passed. The candles have all been blown out. The ink on the papyrus has dried. The chisels have fallen silent, and the frantic beating of his heart has been quiet for more than 34 centuries. The heretic king, his beautiful queen, his forgotten children, his angry priests, and his fierce generals are all resting now, sharing the exact same deep, democratic slumber beneath the desert sand. The sun they fought over still rises every morning, and it still sets every evening, completely indifferent to the names we give it, casting its warm, golden light equally upon the ruins of the temples and the modern villages along the Nile. Listen to the profound, soothing rhythm of the desert night. The wind is a long, slow exhalation, a gentle lullaby that has been singing to these broken stones for millennia. It tells you that the anxieties of the present moment, the battles we fight in our daily lives, the fears we harbor about our own legacies, and the heavy burdens we carry through the daylight hours are all, in the grand framework of time, nothing more than passing shadows on the sand. They are brief, transient ripples on the surface of an immense, silent ocean. Let the ancient peace of Amarna envelop you like a soft, heavy blanket of dark linen. Let go of the need to find a definitive answer to the mystery of his life. You do not need to decide if he was a madman or a visionary, a criminal or a saint. Those categories belong to the noisy, chaotic world of the daylight. In the deep quiet of the night, those distinctions fade into irrelevance. He was simply a human being who dared to dream a radical dream, who loved deeply, who suffered immensely, and who finally found the rest that eluded him throughout his entire tumultuous life. The stars are beginning to emerge now, thousands of tiny, silver eyes piercing through the deep, violet canopy of the African sky. They are the exact same stars that Akhenaten looked up at from his palace balcony. The same eternal lights that watched his city rise from the dust and watched it fall back into the earth. They shine with a cool, serene permanence, a quiet reminder that the universe remains beautifully, perfectly in balance, regardless of the small, frantic dramas of human ambition. Let your thoughts slow down to match the deep, glacial rhythm of the desert. Feel the heavy, supportive presence of the earth beneath you, an ancient foundation that has held the weight of an entire civilization and now holds you in your moment of rest. There are no more letters to read. There are no more inscriptions to decipher. There are no more boundaries to guard and no more gods to fight. The empire is at peace. The horizon is silent. The long historical journey is complete. The story has found its end in the dust, and the dust has found its peace in the dark. Allow yourself to slide gently, seamlessly, and with absolute safety into the deep, restorative waters of your own slumber. Let the shadows of the ancient world fade into a soft, dreamless quiet. The sun has set on the horizon of the Aten. The city of light has gone to sleep, and it is finally, beautifully time for you to rest.